welcome everyone. Thank you for being here with us and letting this event kind of organically start, but here we are. First and foremost, this is one of our first events of our speaker series. We want to make this an opportunity for you to engage with some of the leaders that we have in our community in a more intimate setting. Obviously, from young professionals, we do mix and mingles, we do a lot of big events, but this is an opportunity to really get to meet someone and understand and learn about them, what they do, learn about why they live in Salt Lake, and hopefully gain something from them and meet people here. So we're excited to start this. We're very excited to be here at the Noir Event Center. This will hopefully be one of our homes for this, and we're going to look at some other spaces too, but this is, we're very excited to be here. And so we're very lucky to have our first speaker here, and I think you've all met her because you are very great at meeting everyone in person. So Sui Lang, the Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Zion's Bank, is here to speak with us, and our fearless leader, Vinay, our board president. So I'll turn it over to him and we'll get started. Thank you all for attending.
All right, thanks, Peter. I appreciate it. And yes, this is our inaugural speaker series. So thank you so much.
History.
We really are. And we're doing it because of Women's History Month. So that's why we want to have Panoke come and speak to us about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a few other things. And so what we kind of want to do is just have her introduce herself, and then we have some questions we'll ask, and then we'll open it up for Q&A to everyone else. So please, Sui Lang, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so like personal story,
Yeah.
what brought me here, where I'm originally from. So originally born in the beautiful islands of Hawaii. I was raised here in Salt Lake City, Utah. As a woman of color growing up in a place like Utah, I quickly recognized the disparities that existed amongst women, people of color, and emerging young leaders like the young professionals in Salt Lake City in politics in particular. So from that, I developed my passion for politics, studied political science at the University of Utah, where I had a whole host of older white male conservative men invest in me early on in my career. And I always make a note to mention that because it helped me tremendously. That was one of the greatest assets that I gained from my undergraduate experience, learning how to build trusting, meaningful, productive relationships with men. A lot of the work that I've done has been in male-dominated spaces, and as a woman, you really have to develop that skill set. And I would encourage all of the young professionals here tonight to think thoughtfully about that and how you can better do that. Moved back to Washington, D.C. for grad school, where I studied American University's Women in Politics Institute there. Lived on Capitol Hill for 13 years, doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the political arena. And so getting more women, people of color elected to public office. Clearly there is great value in diversifying our political leadership that impacts public policies that impact all of our lives across the nation. And then also I describe it as democratizing the media landscape. So amplifying the voices of women, people of color, and emerging young leaders in the local and mainstream media, speaking about a broad range of public policy issues. Moved back to Utah about, I'll call almost 5 years ago, for personal reasons. I'm a proud mother of an 18-year-old, although she is taller, smarter, and much more mature than I am.
Okay.
At 8 years old, she was probably ready to move out and get her own apartment. But we moved back for her high school experience. She was studying at a charter school back in Washington, and they were strictly academic. She wanted the social elements, like cheerleading, sports teams, dances, things like that, which, hey, I got all that in my high school experience, so if I can create that for her as well, I'm going to. So we moved back. She studied at Skyline High School, so she's a proud Eagle, and now she's a proud Bruin. She graduated last year from their IB program to the varsity cheerleading thing, and now she's a freshman at UCLA, studying biz econ. So again, she's a lot smarter than I am, and a numbers person. So when I moved back to back to Utah, I really had no plan professionally. And so I applied for, 100 jobs when I first got back here, for people who have ever moved to a city just to, without a job, right? And a number of doors just kind of slammed in my face. For one reason or another, things just didn't work out, and I was in that space where I was like, I hate Utah. Utah's not feeling me. I'm not feeling it. I'm moving back to DC. But then my kid was thriving. And so this is what parents do, right? We make sacrifices to make sure our children are set up for success. So I started plugging myself into the community, building relationships, started joining boards, getting to know people, developed some partnerships, started doing corporate diversity training here across Utah's business community. George Floyd hit. Fast forward, my consulting firm kind of blew up. I can fulfill all the requests I was getting. And within 1 week, 3 organizations in Utah reached out to me, encouraging me to apply for these positions. And they were all leadership roles within very large, prominent companies right here in the Beehive State. And so quickly, I became Zions Bank's #1. They became my #1. And I was really, they reached out to me because of the work I was doing in the community. And so I want to make sure I make that point in tonight's conversation, because community. A lot of my career has been in 2 areas of the country, Washington, D.C. and Salt Lake City, Utah. And if you look at the differences between those 2 areas of our country, vastly different, right? Pretty much opposite ends of the spectrum. But when it comes to value systems, right, and values that people in those communities hold dear, I would describe Washington, D.C. very career-driven, wealth, power, influence. These are all drivers in that community. In Utah, I would say those drivers are faith, family, and community. So they're vastly different, and I've definitely felt that since I have moved back, and especially since I've been serving in this role. Everyone knows Zions Bank, right? Zions Bank is a pillar in our community. We pride ourselves on being a community bank. We make heavy investments in the community. And it is truly an honor to work for our president and CEO, Scott Anderson, which is the #1 reason why I accepted the role at Zions Bank. But it has been dream job, dream boss, doing the work I've always dreamed of. And I never thought I would love Utah so much. and also want to note, I used to be a young professional, Now I don't know if I still qualify, but I really love working with Next Gen. Right? Young professionals will be the heart and the energy of the city. And so they always have been. And so if there's any opportunity for me to invest in them, mentor them, open doors for them, absolutely, yes. So thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness.
So excited to be
That's a great intro and great bio about your life and experience. And so I'm kind of curious, then, when you started in college, you studied poli-sci.
Yeah.
What did you think you were going to do with a poli-sci degree?
I get that question often. What do you do with political science degrees? Yeah. So, okay, oftentimes people are familiar with an MBA, right? Yes. Master's in Business Administration. I have what we call an MPA, Master's in Public Administration. But the difference between, you either study business, economics, or political science, or sometimes philosophy, right? But it's public sector versus private sector, right? You want a career in business, or you want a career in government, in political organizing, community development, the nonprofit sector, all of that is wrapped up in there. So I would describe political science is the passion piece, it's civic engagement, it's very mission driven, it's you want to give back. Whereas, the drivers for business majors is generally, wealth, growing business, strengthening the economy, profit margin, things like that, which is it's not a bad thing.
No.
Just different drivers, know. And I've never been money motivated. I've always been mission or passion driven. So you'll never see me on the face of Forbes magazine. But I love the work that I do.
Well, let's talk about that, because you mentioned that this is your absolute favorite job, right? That you've ever had. So how do you think you got to that role, and especially if you moved here to Utah, been rejected hundreds of times, right? How do you...
Not hundreds, but...
Okay.
Maybe up to 100.
Up to 100. After 10, it just seems like
a lot of times. I'm overexcited.
So how do you find that? Because when you have that despair, and then all of a sudden you find this gem that you've been searching for.
Yes.
How did that happen for you?
It's consistent kind of intention, belief in self. There's a lot of faith affirming and faith abiding kind of practices and rituals. I guess I'd describe it that way. Again, I don't even know how it happened. But I remember all of those dark moments, and if any of you know what it feels like to be rejected or overlooked or undervalued or why am I here? This is not the right place for me, I have experienced that over and over again. And I feel like it's been kind of a refining of the heart and the mind, and really kind of sharpened my ability to identify that, and when other people are experiencing, whether it be cultures or relationships or partnerships that are unhealthy, it's really helped me identify those much quicker, and then know how to work towards resolving them. And that's essentially the work that I'm doing today, right? It's culture. It's very much driving and shifting culture, strengthening minds, or I like to describe the work that we do as being in the business of opening hearts and strengthening minds. And it's essentially invisible, right? You can't just measure it through quantitative data or quantitative ways. Very much of it is qualitative, right? It's the stories that people tell. It's emotions, it's feeling, right? And oftentimes business is driven by quantitative data, right? So now I feel all this diversity, equity, and inclusion work that's happening in corporate America is the social outcomes, it's the social impact, it's the culture, it's all of this stuff that has always existed, but we've never really paid attention to it because it didn't show up in a spreadsheet. You know what I mean? And so it's the difference there. And so when we track our impact, we track both business outcomes and social outcomes. And they, data always tells a story, but it never tells the full story. And so you need to bring those narratives, those personal experiences and perspectives into the equation to really get an accurate assessment of how are we doing on this work.
Right, it's a qualitative and a quantitative together.
A hybrid.
Yes, and you mentioned that you were predominantly working in male-dominated fields as a female.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. How do you navigate those waters? What's that like? Being able to stand out.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to be good at what you do.
Yeah.
That's essentially how I have navigated all those circles. You have to be twice as good to get half. And that's kind of a philosophy and a principle a lot of people of color have adopted in America, because for many of us, it has been our truth. It has been our experience. Experiencing some of these social and cultural barriers that some of our male counterparts may not experience, but I wouldn't say that they don't experience them, right? Regardless of what identity you identify as being a part of, you have experienced some form of social and cultural barrier to success. And so my goal in the work I do is really to figure out how to eliminate those barriers to success so that all people can rise and thrive. But also over time, I actually really love and enjoy working with men because they are very, again, I don't want to fall into stereotyping, either gender or any gender identity, but for some reason I've always naturally navigated towards men socially. And so I have a lot of close friends who are male. They just keep it simple. They keep it light, keep it moving, Whereas, meaning like, okay, let me use an email, for example. Okay, you guys are laughing because you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like emails, right? Like men will respond with like one word. Text messages, email, right? Whereas a lot of my female colleagues and friends will respond and tell me all about their day. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I can't make this thing because blah, 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 blah. Right? It's like 2 paragraphs. Whereas men will be like, no, can't make it. You know what I mean? It's like clear, it's concise. I appreciate that, but then I also appreciate those colleagues that will go into more detail and share more of the interpersonal side of communication, right? Instead of just kind of a cold, blunt, here you go, you know what I mean? I'm just talking about different forms and styles of communication.
Good, yeah. Understanding who your clients
This is weird, people not responding. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm more of a conversation person, but we'll get to that.
So tell us a little bit more about your role. What is diversity, equity, and inclusion? I hear it all the time.
It's a great question.
What is it? And that's what I'd like to really kind of understand a little bit more.
So this is how I simplify it for people.
Yeah.
It's the people part of the equation.
Okay.
It's the people part of any business strategy, and I would argue your human capital is your most valuable asset, right? So take a bank, for example. Take people out of the equation, what do you have left? You know, a big pile of cash and a bunch of empty buildings. It's the people that bring that cash to life, that make those investments, that are stewards to that capital to help make it, you know, help it grow, right? And so people, again, are the most valuable asset of any organization. And so I'm the people person. And so when your people, right, feel heard, included, like they belong here, they're valued, they're supported, their organizations are investing in them, they perform at their best. So I developed this thing called the DEI equation. Okay. I like to use mathematical equations to kind of articulate different complex concepts and principles, things like that. And so it goes like this: diversity times people plus inclusion times culture equals a high-performance organization. High-performance organizations are very successful in achieving their goals, right? And at Zions Bank, in our industry, our ultimate goal is to build economic inclusion. That is the role that we play in the bigger picture of achieving true equality in America. And the way that we do that is by opening opportunity, increasing access, and investing our capital. And you and I talked about this earlier. There are three forms of capital. There's human capital, our people. There's social capital, our relationships, the trust that we build amongst our teams, with our clients, and ultimately in the community. And thirdly, it's financial capital, our monetary investments. So any organization is going to be successful if you invest heavily and equitably in those three forms of capital. And so, again, going back to the DEI equation, you would take all of that, right? Diverse group of people in an inclusive culture, high-performing organization times that entire thing by the equity tool. And the equity tool is the manner in which we do business, right? It's also invisible. It's integrity, it's honesty, transparency, accuracy. Those little subtle nuances that come up in social engagements, right? And you can tell just meeting someone, I just met you for the first time today. You know what I mean?
Right.
And already we have this connection, right? And you sense that about people, it's the X factor. Those subtle nuances are very significant because people are really sensitive. I think the pandemic has shown that, right? And we're very in tune with if we feel comfortable with someone, if we're going to trust them or not. And oftentimes it shows up in these very subtle forms of social engagement. And so that is the equity tool, the manner in which we engage with people.
So you said you used to live here, and then you went off to DC, and now you come back, right? So what do you think has happened or changed or evolved in the last, what, decade plus that you were gone for?
I was gone, yeah.
Right? Like, so you've seen the different lifestyles that DC has versus here in Salt Lake.
Yeah.
But have you seen the evolution of the diversity, equity, and inclusion from when you initially were here to now? Like, what is that? What have you seen in regards to development of it?
Drastic shift in the right direction. Like, I'm so excited about the Beehive State right now. I'm like the biggest Utah commercial, you know what I mean? Even for my friends back on the East Coast. But a lot of things have changed. Some of the key things that have changed. First of all, the main thing that has not changed is Utah still has the strongest economy in the country. Utah is also the youngest state with the highest millennial population, largest millennial population, second only to Washington, D.C. In addition to that, our ethnic and racial diversity is growing. And so 1 in 4 Utahns identifies as a person of color. 1 in 4. And I remember back in the day when it was, I don't know, maybe 1 in 10. And if it wasn't that, it felt like that. You know what I mean? But we also have the highest population growth in the country as well over the past 10 years. So people are moving to Utah in droves for a variety of reasons. I would say the number one reason is economic opportunity. We were just talking about this earlier. People of color and young people will move to Utah for economic opportunity, but what's going to keep them here is community. And so it's organizations like YPSLC that are going to help them build community, plug them in, right? I belong here. We don't just want to excel professionally in our careers. We want a social life too. You know, I want one as well. So you're helping me out too. Many of us are married to our jobs, and so, but you know, to answer your question, a lot of things have shifted, and I think in the right direction. It's such an opportune time to live in the Beehive State, to live in Utah.
Yeah.
So many leaders here, key community and business leaders, get it. We get what diversity, equity, inclusion really means, and we're not just willing to have the conversation take it to the next level, but to invest in it and make sure everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed.
That's good. So then, what are you bullish on then with Utah? Like, what do you think our opportunities are? When because you work for Zions Bank, they got all the economic forecasts, and you know, what do you see coming down the pipe for us here?
There's still work to be done. I feel like it's gonna happen one conversation at a time. There's still people that have that old school kind of traditional mindset.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: so what would make somebody want to come here if they've never been to Utah before?
That would be a question for them. But what I've heard, people love the mountains. You know, they're either skiers or they've heard about the economy. I think you know the reason why a lot of Californians are moving here, and Utah is like really not happy with that. We will not allow Utah to become California because they can purchase a home twice as large with land, you know, at half the cost of what they can in some of the suburban areas in California. And so that is driving our housing market through the roof. And so Utahns can't afford to buy homes in Utah. So that's frustrating us. But, you know, I mean, there are a whole host of reasons why people would want to move to Utah. I feel like it's a great area to achieve work-life balance as well. You know, where else can you have this metropolis, this beautiful city, right, surrounded by mountains? You're within 20 minutes of hiking trails, ski resorts, you know, all of that, national parks here. You're a hop, skip, and a jump from California, Las Vegas, Canada. You know, and so it's very strategically kind of its location.
Right.
It's the region that we sit in. I think we described as Intermountain West.
Yep.
It's not Midwest, but yeah, Intermountain West. And so, yeah, I mean, a whole host of reasons.
Gotcha. And then, so let's just say for yourself, if you're going to talk to your 25-year-old self, knowing everything you know now, you know, what advice would you kind of give yourself when you were 25?
That's such a great question.
I know, that's why I asked.
Yeah. There are three kind of mantras, or like leadership mantras, that I share with especially young people. The first one is, I mean, confidence, right? I wake up every morning and I say this statement to myself in the mirror, and it goes something like this: I am really good at what I do. In fact, I am the best at what I do because no one does it like I do.
Right.
So that's one thing that I stay grounded in knowing no one is going to do what you do, what the gift that you bring into this world, no one's going to do it like you do. So stay grounded and rooted in that. I have, over the years, you know, when doors were slammed in my face, I questioned my ability, my competence, my everything far too many times. And if I hadn't done that, I mean, who knows what would have happened. But that's one thing I would go back and just stay true to yourself. Believe in yourself. Regardless of what's happening around you, what doors are being slammed, what doors are not being opened, or what doors are being opened, always stay grounded in who you are, in your identity. The second one is, my philosophy with diversity, equity, inclusion is to go to the margins and work your way in. Okay. So establish partnerships, relationships with the unlikely partner, right? So as a woman of color, right, and oftentimes women of color lead these diversity, equity, inclusion conversations because we sit at the intersectionality of gender and race, which a lot of these conversations are generally centered around those two things. But I would partner with a white male conservative banker like Scott Anderson.
Right.
That is a perfect partnership because we complement one another. His strengths are my opportunities and vice versa, right? People would look at me, there's a certain segment of our population that would see a leader like me, automatically trust me, and yeah, I could follow her, I'm totally on board. And maybe skeptical about a Scott, and vice versa. Automatically jump on board and trust a Scott Anderson and follow him, and maybe skeptical about me. But if we come together and move forward on a common vision, that broadens our circle of trust. It broadens our audience, and so it's a win. The likelihood of getting that win is much greater. So going to the margins and working your way in. And then the third piece is, what is it? Oh, if you don't bring something different to the table, you are irrelevant.
Okay.
So I'm starting to see a shift in culture where, especially in Utah, where it was all about, and especially young people, trying to fit in. I want to be like XYZ. I want to fit in and be like everybody else. And that, over time, you'll start to see that kind of suppress your own identity as an individual, a unique individual, right? It can lead to a whole host of issues. Whereas the shift now is being different is fitting in. Like being different is cool. That's what makes you belong here, right? We see the differences that you have and we embrace them. That's diversity, right? And so I'm seeing that shift, and that is a very healthy culture. When we can identify our differences and celebrate them together and find unity in that, that is a healthy culture. And so and that's where all people will thrive. So just recognizing what is it that makes you different, that's the value you bring to whatever table you're sitting at.
Okay, so confidence. What was the second
Unlikely
one?
partnership. Going to the margins.
The margins.
Working your way in.
Yeah. And then being different. Yeah. No, that's some great advice. If you would tell yourself when you're 25, that's where you'd sit. So that's great. And so now a couple more questions, just kind of like get to know you a little bit more as well. So let's just say it's a Sunday afternoon, you're kicking back at home, and you're gonna go grab a book on your bookshelf. What are you gonna be reading?
So I'm currently reading The Sum of Us by
Okay.
Heather McGhee. She's a Black economist.
Okay.
I've been a huge fan of hers for decades. And we started a book club at the bank. And so we read a book for the entire year. The way we broke it up, because I don't know about your schedule, but most people can't read a book in a month. Although I think my boss could, though. I think he could read a book like in a day and still do his job. He's like a machine. But so what we do, we break it up over 12 months.
Okay.
And so each month I host a member from our C-suite, so one of our EVPs, and a community leader, and we do deep dive conversations on each chapter. And there's so much meat in this book, and every book that we choose, more than enough content for that hour-long conversation. So I host a conversation from noon to 1 p.m. every third Tuesday. And this is the book we chose for this year.
Very cool.
And so it's really fostered a lot of interesting dialogue.
Okay, and then that's what you're going to be reading on a Sunday afternoon.
Yes. Or sometimes, I'll just journal.
Okay.
And then I'll read my old journals.
Yeah.
It's fun to go back and see, oh my gosh, I thought that? You know what I mean? I thought to write that down even, wow, I've progressed. So it's cool, it's one thing to write journals, but it's cool to go back and read your own stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? See how far you've grown.
Like to go out to eat at all? Do you have a favorite restaurant? Okay, well.
Favorite. There are lots. I love Fleming's. I love their petite filet with the Brussels sprouts and the sauteed mushrooms. That's one of my favorites. But Sapa is another, I've been there, 24 times, and I just discovered it. So it's a go-to.
Yeah.
But I'm constantly finding, another cool spot that I found is Bourbon Street.
Yeah.
Or is it Bourbon House?
Bourbon House.
Bourbon House. Oh my gosh, the speakeasy, kind of hidden
Oh,
underground.
yeah. Cool vibe.
Super cool vibe. They have a DJ. Yeah, I'm trying to for my friends here. Cool spots to hang out.
Did you see that
Bourbon
new-
House.
The new one they're opening up, it's like a New Orleans inspired restaurant.
Oh yeah? Cool.
I forget the name, it just sounds really, really good. There's a lot of good restaurants like that.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm down. I eat anything and everything. So.
Well, perfect. Well, last question before we open up to the rest of everyone else here for Q&A. But tell us about this this sweater that you're wearing.
Oh, my
today.
hoodie. I mean, I thought I'd try to look young today. I know you guys go to work in hoodies and, cargo pants. So, but I dressed it up because I did wear heels. Usually I wear house slippers, like, every day when I go to work.
'Cause you work at home.
Because you can only see from work. So I've got my suit on, and then I've got my Lulu leggings and my house slippers. Anyone that comes to my home knows that's my uniform. And so, okay, the question was, the hoodie. Okay, so I like to, kind of brand things. This is the Equal Justice Initiative. It's Brian Stevenson's organization initiative that he does out of Alabama. I'm a huge fan. But his passion, he's an attorney, Harvard Law School grad, and probably the purest human being on the planet. Is devoted his life to saving lives. So he represents people who are incarcerated and on death row.
Okay.
In many of his cases, they're Black people who have been wrongfully accused for some of these crimes. And so he does amazing, amazing work and is working to minimize the incarceration rate here in America that is just astronomically blown up in recent decades.
Yeah.
And so I encourage everyone to watch the documentary 13th by Amy DuVernay if you have not already. Everything is outlined there. Brian Stevenson is a strong champion in that point.
Right.
So this is their hoodie.
It's very cool.
I just got it mailed in.
Awesome. I'm glad you brought it up and then wore it for today.
Yeah.
So perfect. So now we want to open it up to questions. If everybody has any. Right here, Emma.
So I loved your equation.
Thank you.
That you spelled out. I think one of the biggest obstacles that I'm trying to grapple with is opening up opportunity to people at scale. So do you know of any organizations that are doing that successfully? Or do you have any advice around how to do that for like a small to medium-sized business?
Opening opportunity. And what do you mean by that?
So the way I heard it from you, and maybe I misunderstood, I thought that meant like opening up opportunity to diverse people to join the organization.
Okay, so you're talking about recruitment.
Did I read that right, or was it something else that you were talking about?
Yeah, there are multiple interpretations
Okay.
to some of these basic big picture concepts.
Okay.
But opportunity if you're talking about recruiting.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
diversifying the workforce.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a great question. There are a number of ways. I don't want to name one organization that's doing it well. I feel like we have a lot of organizations that are doing certain things well. And one that just is immediately top of mind, because I also want to honor President Randall at the University of Utah, who was just inaugurated today. He helped foster a partnership with the University of Utah's Business School, Business School, and Howard University, where we're recruiting HBCU students from Howard to come and serve summer internships here in the Beehive State. And so a couple of years ago they started it, and then obviously the pandemic hit. The first year that we brought students to Utah physically was last year. We had 16 interns from Howard serving in 9 different corporations here in Salt Lake City. And 2 of them, they had a phenomenal experience over the summer, and 2 of them received FTEs, full-time employment offers, and so they are now working in Utah-based companies. So over this past year, Zions Bank is now a corporate partner in this program. We just confirmed, we just closed our recruiting process for this year with 25 summer interns from a multiple number of HBCU universities, and they'll be serving in 14 different companies. And so our ultimate goal, obviously, with any internship is to ultimately bring them on board as a full-time FTE. And so, that's just one creative way of diversifying our talent pool here in Utah. In addition to that, I would say, when it comes to diversity recruitment for specific ethnic and racial groups, a lot of it is based on relationships. And so having those community partnerships, connections, you know, in those specific communities that you're trying to recruit for, that's everything. You know what I mean? You have to have someone to vouch or that they already trust, to help foster and broker that relationship, right? And that's how we launched our recruiting strategy for this program, right? Who do we know? What alumni, right, do we have here in Utah that can kind of explain or pitch Utah in a way which would be enticing for a young Black student on the East Coast? You know what I mean? This is a very unique niche. And so the more you can kind of personalize your approach versus using kind of a general blanket approach to recruitment, it is going to be better. You're going to see better results. And shoot, my friend Cheryl Gardner, she was hired by United Way to conduct a study with over 200 BIPOC students, and this has to do with education. And what they see, you know, what they're looking for in terms of programs and things like that. And the results were, I mean, amazing. And everything that group of BIPOC students were sharing with her in terms of what is going to help them, what they see as a high quality educational experience, you can apply in the private sector as well, right? They're looking for leadership that look like them, that represent them. They're looking for social impact, right? What is my company doing? What is this company doing in the community, right? Do they stand up for social justice issues and causes? And I would say if you look at issues that this next gen young professionals are looking at right now, when they're looking for jobs or developing their careers, number one is always going to be compensation, right?
Yeah.
Number two, flexibility, because they want, you know, everyone's working like a hybrid essentially, or full-time virtual. And the third piece, social impact. What are your companies doing in the community? So I would center your recruiting efforts around that, and hopefully that you'll see some success.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question.
I was in DC for a few years,
Yay,
so I
awesome.
love to hear somebody else from DC moving to Utah. So
Yeah.
represents.
Awesome.
There's a huge influx now and focus on hiring diverse, putting people of color forward in those hires. How do you retain those hires? What kind of communities do you create within the culture? Because a lot of times I'm hearing people, there may be one or two Black people that are sitting at the table, but they're there,
Yeah.
but they're the only ones. And they're still having to adjust the way that they exist in that workplace to make themselves blending more with the people that they're working with. So what can companies do at a more granular level to build a community to retain the talent and find talent that they see? Because the first step, yes, is hiring them, but a lot of these people are leaving after 3 to 5 years because they're done with it.
Understood.
So what is something that you would say, ways that companies can build that culture for retention, and something that your company is doing right now to create that culture as well?
Great question. A large part of my role is driving culture internally, right? And part of that, we have this thing called the 5 pillars. The first one is we have a One Zion's Diversity Council. And so this council represents all of our business lines. We have executive leadership from ETO as well as Zion's Bank across our footprint that serve on that council. So we get together once a month and talk big picture strategy, what is happening in the different business lines, how can we create more inclusive cultures, what are the needs of our employees, things like that. And then the second one is employee business forums. That's what we call them. But many companies use the term employee resource groups. And those are, you know, essentially affinity groups that are, and so we call them employee business forums. We have 9 of them. Which is a lot. And I just attended this DEI summit in Atlanta a couple of months ago, where corporate diversity, senior leadership people just like myself, all came together to kind of discuss, you know, what we're facing, kind of brainstorming, strategizing. Majority of companies will have, like, I don't know, between 4 to 6 of these. They'll have like a women's one, Black, African American, Latino, Hispanic, generally aligned with different cultural groups and racial groups. We also have a disabilities, mental illnesses, chronic conditions forum. We have women in technology, women's business. And then we have a military and veterans business forum as well. So all of these employee business forums are led by employees. So they're employee-led. They're also paired with an executive sponsor from our C-suite. And then, they just create, all of them have chairs, co-chairs, they have committees if they would like, and they host conversations or gatherings. Sometimes monthly, some of them are quarterly, and they're all just conversations just like this one. The ultimate goal for each of these forums is to identify and eliminate barriers to success. And so it's hyper-focused on, business outcomes, but also very it's cultural awareness, it's building social connections with people who have similar identity or the same identity. Also a strong emphasis is allyship. And so you don't necessarily have to identify as being a Black employee to join the Black African American Business Forum. In fact, overwhelming majority of our members of that forum identify as white. And so it's a great, but it's led by our Black employees. I see that hit a sensitivity for you.
I feel like that's great, and it's a fine line, right? Like, because then that area is still predominantly white. You know what I mean?
But that represents the demographics of our company. And so what's most important is that people who identify as Black are leading these conversations. They're at the forefront of these conversations.
Gotcha. Okay.
Generally, the benefit of having these types of groups in an organization is for that individual to serve in a leadership role.
Gotcha.
Right? And if they're not serving a leadership role within the business structure of it, right? Creating these groups can create one for them, right? And so it will start to shift the perception some of the white employees have of people of color. They start to see them as a leader. Yes, this is what leadership looks like. You and I lived in Washington, D.C., where that's already what leadership looks like to me. That's global leadership. It's Black, it's Asian, it's Hispanic, it's Polynesian, you know what I mean? And then there's some white people in there too. But areas of the country like Utah, we're still going through that demographic
that's where, like,
shift.
I'm learning to overcome that is because I'm from Chicago, so I'm not used to not having so much diversity since I moved here.
Yes, yeah. So it's a culture
been
shock.
such a shock.
Mm-hmm.
And having, even at these organizations, having the minorities in these groups be what the groups are about is a hard thing to digest fully, because I still feel like there's a form of affirmation that has to be made in order to feel. Do you? I don't know.
Understood.
Okay. Yeah.
Another way that we kind of develop that is we bring in speakers. So a lot of these forums will bring in community leaders or guest speakers who do identify as members of whatever community group they're representing and foster conversations around that. In addition to that, it's not just people who identify as Black that are part of the Black experience.
Right.
I don't identify as Black, but I'm raising a young Black woman. So my child is half Black. My best friends in my life, are Black. And so there are different experiences. There are a lot of families, white families here in Utah, who have adopted Black children. So they're also committed to learning about the Black experience, how can they create, culturally aware experience for their children. And so we're all in this together, which is why allyship really is the focus of all of this, not necessarily just one over the other. And there's just so many vastly different perspectives and experiences involved. It's important to be sensitive to all of those differences. But, yeah.
Okay, 2 more questions?
Thank you so much for coming and speaking.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And you're with, sorry, it's big. And so we're talking about, with the diversity and equity and inclusion, it seems like we're focused, what a lot of this has been more is on the employment side. A huge issue with systemic racism was built in our banking system, and it is very relevant today. So talking about people coming into bank, are they working on addressing that? They say they are. George Floyd happens, they say they are. But you're on the inside.
Yes.
And so do you see that? Because of course employment is absolutely important, because these are then going to be our mortgage brokers and our lenders, and investors. And so this is going to be that kind of domino effect. You know, with the people coming here today, representing our communities, trying to get mortgages for homes and do this, have you seen a difference? Are you part of addressing that outward, not just the in-house? Do you think it's ever going to get better? I don't know. We're kind of...
Thank you so much for this question.
Yeah.
And this is a very important question because we are a bank. And banks don't operate internally, we operate externally. We can have the most healthy culture for all of our employees, but if we're not doing what we need to do externally, we're not building economic inclusion, which is our ultimate goal, as I stated earlier. And so the answer to your question is yes. And I'm going to add to that, they were doing this long before I stepped into this role. Generally, people who serve in this role have to convince the C-suite executives to get on board with X, Y, Z. I'm trying to keep up with Science Bank. I'm trying to keep up with Scott Anderson. Like, he will go out.
I would have never thought that. But
which is why this is what I want to socialize.
And the predominant religion and white people, and I'm like, no, they're not.
Yes.
Zion.
Oh my gosh, and I'm here to deliver that it is happening. There are so many woke, conscious, older white male conservative bankers. Yes, it's Science Bank. Oh my gosh, who get this stuff? Yes. And again, this is it goes to the assumptions, the snap judgments that we all make.
Right.
Even I continue to be surprised. Like every day, I'm like, are you serious? Like this is why I'm describing my dream job. You know what I mean? They're already on board.
I did it before.
Yeah, which is why
she's
the work
working with the enemy.
and that's such a common assumption.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And also on the Women's History note, I just want to note, Zions Bank, next year we will celebrate 150 years in business. The very first day, 1873, when Zions Bank opened up their doors, they were one of the only banks in the nation that allowed women to open up bank accounts without a male signature.
Let's go.
Right? Like, I want to shout that from the rooftops.
Goodbye, Mountain America.
Zions Bank, Zions Bank has been at the heart of women's equality and diversity, equity, and inclusion since inception. That was an executive business decision, and we're still doing that work today. A couple of things I want to note. We also last year just launched the Small Business Diversity Banking Program. Setting aside capital, it's a lending program, special purpose lending program, approved by the OCC that is intended to invest in women-owned, ethnic minority-owned, and veteran-owned businesses. So there's that piece. In addition to that, in response to your comment as well, with like small businesses, we're sponsoring a diversity and inclusion offering for small businesses through the Salt Lake Chamber. And so this is sponsored and underwritten by Zions Bank. And we want to help small businesses who don't have the capacity to hire like a me, but they need to learn how to do meaningful, substantive diversity and inclusion work.
Get this information out to the underrepresented communities. Like, hey, there's these firms, there's these resources, because they're not like, oh,
can you
hey,
help?
let me listen to a speaker.
We're in the process of developing that outreach strategy right now.
Knocking on doors. You know what I mean?
Yes,
It's
exactly. Yes, we're partnering also with Salt Lake County. They're getting to roll out what they call their co-op. It's Center of Opportunity Partnership, again, serving the most vulnerable businesses and individuals in our community, plugging them into resources like what we have here at Zions Bank.
Like outside, like everyone knows, the Department of Resource Services or Department of Workforce
Slick, or
Services.
just like walking down a street and going down to mom and pop shops.
To know, it's proximity. You don't know what you don't know, and I think that kind of
Exactly.
ties into, you know, what Alice was saying is one of these things that can help with retention of people coming here and not just being a jumping off spot, you know, which has like been a big thing for YP, is to know like, here's a way to get involved civically, community, for the people who now have had access to resources to get out to the neighborhoods, to people who don't even know these resources exist, and have always just lived in this is what, you know, what these abilities are. So I mean, I guess that's always just kind of ways how to bridge that gap of what we know and then what the people who need to know.
Yes, exactly. You're speaking my language.
I said
Let's
we're going
partner.
out. Yeah.
I'm going to plug you into the outreach
Yeah.
strategy. But yes, we need organizations like YPSLC to help socialize, start socializing that, you know? And a lot of these businesses are owned by young people as well. Young people of
Well,
color.
if we retain the more diverse culture that's moving here, eventually they will then become the representation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then
Yes,
it's like, okay,
exactly.
instead of still the majority is, white people are leading this, because what you said is true, that still represents our community. And so if we retain the representation, the hope is that it will match that.
Yeah.
We still could do a lot better, but I hope to see that as we're in this big, and I don't want to take up all the time. My other question was just that, what happened with George Floyd was which is the motivator for people. They got out there, they're hiring people, with their position to come to these companies. Did you see a lot of kind of like doing it for social obligation? Like, oh, look, I'm not racist, I have a black friend. We hired the person to come in and make sure that we meet our quota of looking diverse. And even if the intentions were to salvage the representation in the time where, all eyes on everybody, did you still see a positive impact from that? Because it was like, oh wait, we do have an issue,
One thing I will note, overwhelming majority, this is what I learned from that DEI conference I was telling you about, there were 50 corporate DEI leaders just like me leading corporations across the country. Regional, national, and global organizations like Wells Fargo, UPS, American Airlines, Coca-Cola. These are the people that were in that room. The retention piece. I would say companies were hiring for those positions. They didn't necessarily know how to set them up for success, how to support them. And so within months, they were gone. So there's a huge lesson there. So that's what I see. I'm also seeing some really meaningful hires, like myself, like other key organizations who knew exactly what they were doing. They built it from the ground up, right, internally. And that's really how you should create these types of positions. And Zions Bank has had an internal infrastructure for this work for quite some time. They just never had a fully dedicated person leading all of it. But people who are plugged in internally are very committed, highly competent, and passionate about this work. So they just needed someone to come in and bring it to life, take it to the next level, and establish, credibility in the community, things like that. So that's a me. But to your point, there's always going to be some of the performative hires, right? Because of the pressure, we have to do something, but you're always going to see where that's going to end up. You know what I mean? And so the true test is sustainability, right? Anyone can have a glory moment or glory year even, but can you sustain this level of high performance due to your culture over time? And again, we celebrate 150 years of business next year. So clearly our leaders have figured out a way to build a prosperous, profitable, and sustainable business, right? A lot of what we're doing is working. We're not perfect. There are a lot of lessons to still be learned, but it starts there, being grounded in your principles. Yeah.
All right, and then the last question. Oh, you guys both have one? Why not?
Hi everyone, my name
The
is
spirit of inclusivity.
Brittany. So my question, throughout your night you spoke a lot about passion and you spoke a lot about like your dream job. So for me, this is my first job, fresh out to university, and for me it feels like just a job, like a task to be done. So do you have any tips on like how you strategically thought about setting up yourself for your career and like finding your dream job and like fueling that passion?
Oh my gosh, I love this question so much. And
Oh, she's put on the
I'm
glasses.
going to share something with you. Okay, so one thing I wanted to share with this group, right? And this is something I do just for me personally every year. I put together a personal mission statement. So I encourage young people and some of my clients, when I used to do these personal empowerment leadership development trainings, envision your life as a nonprofit organization, right? Many of us work for companies or nonprofits, whatever. Each of them have a mission statement. So what would the mission statement be for your life, right? Every organization also has a board of advisors, a board of directors. Who would you recruit to be on your personal board? Who are your go-to people? Who are the people you look up to, that you admire, right? And identify, and for me, 4 people. Nelson Mandela, politics. Bob Marley, music. Jay-Z, business.
Yeah.
Okay. And the 4th one, Dave Chappelle.
Oh,
Next month.
yes.
So Dave Chappelle. These are all global creatives that I want to do the work that they were doing. You know what I mean? I look up to them, and so I admire them. They're all on my board of directors, and so I encourage you to put something like that and ask yourself, well, what are you passionate about? Right? What do you enjoy doing? I can't even tell you how much time, what percentage of our lives we spend in our jobs.
Right.
So you better be happy in that job. You better enjoy that job. Don't compromise to live a less than optimal life. You know what I mean? You cannot compromise on happiness because, after the past couple of years, I'm living life as if the world is going to end this weekend. You know what I mean? And it is an absolute possibility. Trying to stay positive here as well. But one thing I wanted to share. So I also set like goals for myself, and the number 7 is kind of my number. And so these are the goals. It's body, mind, spirit, health, wealth, personal, professional. Okay? In that order. Now notice professional is last because my professional career should align with everything else because everything else is who I am. That's who I want to be. It's the gift that I bring to this world. So I'm just going to read it again. Body, mind, spirit, health, wealth, personal, then professional. Carve out your career that way and you'll always find yourself in a meaningful, purposeful, right? You'll find much more satisfaction and happiness and joy in the work that you do.
Just totally flipped
Yeah.
the vision board concept. That
Right?
was great.
That's what I do.
Going home and writing the video.
How can I turn something on its head?
Okay, then final question.
Hi guys, my name is Anika. So my question is, we know that as you go higher up in your professional career or ladder, unfortunately diversity reduces. Okay? What are some of the things that you have done to get through being the only person in the room? Because I'm sure that has happened to you before, where you're the only diverse person in that room. And how did you build your confidence through those situations? Because it can be very intimidating being the only one. And I know that we're trying to increase diversity and trying to do all of that in Utah. However, it's still very prevalent. So during our transition period, how did you, what would you say to other people to build that confidence and things like that?
Love that question so much as well. I'm just going to go back to those 2 statements that I said earlier. I'm the best at what I do. I'm really good at what I do. Of course you're going to come to me and seek my advice because no one's going to do this like I do it. You know what I mean? I'm the best. And that is something, I've been insecure before. And so we all have to find those ways to build up our confidence again. One thing I also say, in terms of confidence, find something that you do well. And it could be anything, right? It could be cooking, it could be, walking your dog, whatever. For me, it's yoga. I'm really good at yoga. I practice Bikram yoga, and so I try to do it at least 4 to 5 times a week, right? And that builds, strengthens the mind, it strengthens the body, the breathing, everything. The body, mind, spirit is all connected, right? And so, and in my role professionally, I have to be very flexible, right? I have to listen to this person's issue and that, figuratively and literally.
Yeah.
But if the body is flexible, the mind follows. And it helps me be much more patient, understanding, a better listener, things like that. So going back to being the only in the room, in many corporations and nonprofits, governing structures that's still the case, right? You may have an overwhelming majority identifies people of color, but as soon as you rise to the top, it starts to decline. And I'll share this with this group, one very strategic way in which I'm bringing more influence of a leader of color into the C-suite space is through executive coaching. So I had the privilege of hiring executive coach. And somehow in that conversation with my boss, I managed to negotiate 2 executive coaches. And so one of them is a black male, outside of the state, a leader, champion in the industry. And so through that, and if you noticed, the 4 leaders that I look up to, they're all black men. If you didn't notice that, you know, I'm very open and transparent about that. The influence of black male brilliance is going to take any company in America to the next level.
Yeah.
And until you have that influence, you're never going to fully capitalize on the full value or potential of that organization, right? And we don't have time to go into why that is the case, but I think you just accept it. And so that's where that's what I'm doing through executive coaching. I'm bringing in him. It's kind of like a consultant, right? Bringing them directly into the C-suite through me, and then impacting the work that we do when we're developing our strategies and all of that, right? So that's another way to bring that diversity of thought, really, ultimately, into those leadership, high-powered spaces in a non-traditional way. It's a creative and innovative way. In addition to that, if I end up hiring consultants to do work for us, you know, that's another way I could bring in ethnic, racial diversity, right? Cultural diversity. So there are a lot of creative ways to do it. And those are just a couple. But we absolutely need to look at development programs, career advancement programs, whatever, to make sure that it can happen the traditional way as well. You can work from the bottom all the way to the top. And I have one colleague at Amegy Bank. So Zions Bank Corporation, we own 8 community banks across 11 states. One of them is called Amegy Financial, based out of Houston. And one of my dear friends and colleagues, his name is Javon, he started in the Banker Development Program. BDP is what we call it. And I think he's been there almost 20 years. He just got awarded EVP. He's the first black male EVP Zions Bank Corporation in history.
Really?
This just happened last year. And he did it the traditional way. And so it can happen there as well. So, you know, it's important to just be creative, and innovative but know exactly what you're trying to achieve. And if you can't get it this way, or if that's going to take too long, I'm very impatient. Find another way.
Right.
You know what I mean? Creativity, innovative thought.
Well, thanks. Thank you so much for coming. Any final closing thoughts or words you want to impart of your wisdom and sage advice to us?
I mean, you sucked everything out of me. I mean, this was an awesome conversation. One thing that we close all of our conversations at Zions Bank with is building a culture of inclusion. It begins with all of us, right? It begins with me, and it begins with you. You know, no one is doing this work alone, and we can't operate in silos anymore. And so it really takes a collective community effort to really significantly shift the culture where all people will feel like they belong, they are valued, they are supported, and everyone can achieve economic prosperity, right? That's the American dream.
Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.